He was seconds from saying, "I do," when a phone buzzed in his best man's pocket, and in an instant, it shattered everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and family. Daniel Stokes stood at the altar, under a canopy of soft white flowers, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The chapel was packed. Rows of loved ones smiling. Cameras flashing. Strings playing something delicate in the background. All eyes were on him, on them. He glanced sideways at the priest, who gave a nod. The music shifted. The doors swung open. And then, she appeared. Alyssa Monroe. Radiant in ivory. She floated down the aisle like a dream wrapped in silk. Her smile, that same smile that once made him believe in forever, was wide, serene, glowing with confidence. But his best man, Fred, wasn't looking at her. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even breathing, really. He was staring down at his phone, jaw clenched, knuckles white. Daniel felt it before he heard it. A vibration in the air. A pulse that didn't belong in the moment. It was Fred's phone. Just one buzz. One notification. He whispered Daniel's name. Not loud. Not urgent. Just enough for it to feel like the room had gone cold. Fred stepped forward. Handed him the phone. No words. Just a look that said, "You're not going to like this, but you need to see it." Daniel took the phone with fingers that had started to tremble. What he saw made his knees nearly buckle. And not because of what was on the screen, but because of who sent it. The room around him blurred. The aisle. The flowers. The music. It all faded into a roar in his ears. He looked back up at Alyssa, still walking slowly toward him, veil brushing her shoulders, unaware. He blinked. Once. Twice. She didn't look like a stranger. But suddenly that's exactly what she felt like. And just like that, the ceremony wasn't about love anymore. It was about truth. And survival. And betrayal. They say love finds you when you least expect it. For Daniel Stokes, it found him on an evening he almost skipped. The charity gala was supposed to be another formality. A stiff evening of awkward small talk, overpriced canapes, and name tags that never stayed in place. He went because his firm was footing the bill, and because he was the kind of man who kept commitments. But if Daniel had stayed home that night, if he had chosen the comfort of Netflix and takeout over tuxedos and networking, his entire life might have taken a very different turn. He was 32, a man carved from discipline and intention. He worked in corporate finance, where his job was to anticipate risks, quantify losses, and make conservative decisions. Daniel was the kind of person who triple-checked his emails before hitting send, who balanced his checkbook to the cent, and who, perhaps most importantly, believed deeply in predictability. Love for him wasn't fireworks. It was foundation. Something you built, not something you fell into. But then came Alyssa Monroe. She was chaos in a silk dress. A burst of color in his grayscale world. Her laugh didn't just fill the room, it rearranged its center of gravity. Alyssa worked in event design, specializing in immersive experiences. Think floral tunnels, rooftop banquets, Art Deco weddings. Her days were spent waist-deep in fabrics, sketches, Pinterest boards, and her hands always smelled faintly of eucalyptus and glue. Their first interaction was almost comical. Daniel had just stepped away from a conversation about tax incentives when he noticed the floral arch in the center of the ballroom. Intricate, wild, impossibly beautiful. And there she was, standing underneath it, adjusting a strand of hanging orchids with the care of someone straightening a crown. He complimented the arch. She looked him up and down, smirked, and replied, "It was perfect until you stood in front of it." He paused, then laughed. She didn't. And then she did. It was the kind of moment that stuck to your skin. Their first date was a rooftop bar with mismatched chairs and overpriced cocktails. She made fun of his drink order. He corrected her grammar. They debated books and movies and the ethics of pineapple on pizza. It was electric not because they agreed on everything, but because they didn't. One date became 2. Then 3. Then they were falling asleep on video calls and waking up to good morning texts. Daniel, who'd always planned his life with surgical precision, suddenly found himself checking his phone like a teenager, smiling at random and saying yes to things without needing to think twice. But the defining moment came when Daniel's father died. It was a heart attack. Sudden. Crushing. Daniel spiraled inward as he always did. Retreat, regroup, rebuild. But Alyssa didn't let him go quiet. She was there, at the hospital, at the funeral, at the breakfast table, pouring coffee and asking how he was really doing. She helped arrange the wake, coordinated with caterers, and even picked out the music because Daniel couldn't decide between two songs his dad used to hum. She stood beside him, not just physically but emotionally, like scaffolding holding up a building about to collapse. His mother, Marjorie, loved Alyssa instantly. She called her Grace with Grit. Alyssa moved in a few months later. Their apartment became a collage of their personalities. His structured minimalism met her whimsical touches. Sleek black mugs next to hand-painted plates. Hardcover finance books stacked beneath vases of fresh tulips. Every corner whispered compromise, balance, together. They hosted dinner parties with friends who said things like, "You two just work." And it did work. So when Daniel proposed, it wasn't a surprise. It was just right. He did it at the Botanical Gardens, under the wisteria pergola where they'd shared their first kiss. He had the ring custom-made, a vintage-inspired piece with a deep sapphire in the center, because Alyssa once said diamonds were predictable. She said yes before he could even finish asking. The engagement period felt like a dream. Alyssa threw herself into wedding planning with the intensity of someone building a kingdom. From hand-calligraphed invitations to personalized playlists, she curated every detail. Daniel took a step back, happy to support from the sidelines. They began premarital counseling. They chose readings for the ceremony. They even adopted a cat named Juniper, who took to sleeping at Daniel's feet and knocking over Alyssa's candles. They were perfect. But perfection, as we know, is often the most convincing illusion. And behind that illusion, something darker had already begun to stir. There were moments, fleeting, dismissed as stress or wedding jitters, that might have raised flags. A missed call here. A strange look there. A conversation cut short when Daniel walked into the room. But Daniel didn't question. Because love, once rooted deep, is often blind to the shadows around it. He trusted Alyssa. Until the day he stood at the altar, palms sweaty, heart full, smile trembling. And Fred, his best man, walked up to him with a look Daniel would never forget. He handed him a phone. And everything changed. But before we get there, let me take you back. Because sometimes the fall doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's a slow unraveling. And what seems perfect is just the beginning of the lie. Let me take you back to how we got here. Because this story isn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It's about secrets so dark they were never meant to be uncovered. It's about a woman who reinvented herself so many times, she forgot where the lies ended and she began. And it's about a man who thought he knew her, until the moment he didn't. Strap in. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about trust. This isn't fiction. This is real life, twisted, tangled, and ruthless. Welcome to the story of Daniel and Alyssa. And the wedding that exposed a lie so deep, it almost swallowed the truth whole. Stay close. It's about to get dark. They say love is blind, but what they never mention is that love can also be deaf, dumb, and sometimes disturbingly naive. Because when the cracks began to show, Daniel didn't run. He leaned in. At first it was nothing loud. Just whispers behind the curtain, strange little inconsistencies in Alyssa's stories, missed details. Conversations that didn't quite line up when replayed in Daniel's head. It started with his mother, Marjorie. A gentle, no-nonsense woman who didn't meddle, unless she had to. One Sunday morning, over pancakes and orange juice at the kitchen table, she leaned in, hands folded, voice low. "Daniel, I know this may sound odd, but I can't shake a feeling. Alyssa's sweet, yes, but she's hard to read. Like she's performing warmth instead of living in it." Daniel gave her a lopsided smile. "Mom, please, it's just wedding nerves. Alyssa's been juggling her job, the planning, the fittings, the guests. Anyone would be a little guarded." Marjorie didn't argue. She just nodded and sipped her tea slowly, but her eyes stayed locked on his. That was the first whisper. The second came one night, when Alyssa told him she had to meet a friend from her old yoga class, Jasmine. Dinner, maybe a quick drink, nothing serious. She kissed him goodbye, told him not to wait up. But hours later, Daniel got a notification. He'd forgotten Alyssa had synced her rideshare app to their shared iPad. Out of curiosity or maybe gut instinct, he checked it. She hadn't gone to Midtown, where Jasmine supposedly lived. She'd gone to Soho, and stayed there for nearly 3 hours. He asked her about it the next morning, casually. She smiled, breezily waved it off. "Oh, Jasmine's roommate was sick, so we went to Soho instead. We decided to grab sushi by Canal Street. Totally forgot to mention it. She said it with such confidence, such flawless ease, that Daniel almost felt guilty for doubting her. Almost. But his mind kept cataloging the little things. The forgotten details. The misplaced receipts. The late-night phone calls from unknown numbers she'd always dismiss with a quick flick of her wrist and a mumbled, "Just spam again." Still, he told himself it was nothing. Wedding stress. Overthinking. Imagination. Until the photograph. He wasn't snooping. Not intentionally. He was looking for a stamp in Alyssa's drawer. She had a habit of keeping office supplies in strange places. But what he found was a photo tucked behind some tax documents. Alyssa, radiant, laughing, relaxed, standing on a pier. But she wasn't alone. There was a man beside her, arm draped around her waist like he belonged there. Daniel felt his stomach turn. He waited till dinner. Set the photo on the table between them. Who's he? Alyssa glanced at it. Not a flicker of hesitation. Oh my God. That's so old. College friend. We dated for like 5 minutes. His name was Sean or Shane or something. I can't believe I still have that. She chuckled, brushed it off, picked up her fork and changed the subject. Not flustered. Not defensive. Just seamless. Too seamless. Daniel should have pushed harder. But instead, he stared at her, trying to remember if he'd ever heard her mention a Sean. Or Shane. Or anything that sounded remotely like that. He hadn't. But the way she said it, so casually, so earnestly, he started to question his own memory. And that's how it went again and again. Every time Daniel got close to something, every time he asked a question that could poke a hole in her story, Alyssa would spin just enough of a web to redirect him. She'd make him laugh. Remind him of how much she loved him. How stressful everything had become. How silly it was to even worry about the past when they had a future to plan. And just like that, the doubt would fade. Temporarily. But then it would creep back. There were no photos of her childhood. No high school yearbooks. No family albums. No cousins on social media. No relatives RSVPing to the wedding. Alyssa claimed her family had been distant. Old wounds, she said. Too much pain to explain. She'd paint a tragic story of estrangement that tugged at Daniel's heart. He wanted to understand. To support her. But the facts were few and far between, the details oddly vague. She was good at this. At controlling the narrative just enough to keep him in the dark, but warm enough that he didn't feel cold. Daniel started searching quietly. Googling her maiden name. Checking alumni records at the university she said she graduated from. Looking up Sean, or Shane, or whatever his name was. Nothing came up. No graduation photos. No classmate testimonials. No record at all. When he asked about it, Alyssa gasped. You searched me? Seriously? God, Daniel, that hurts. That really hurts. And again, he apologized. He hated how easy it was to feel guilty. But something kept scratching at the back of his mind. Something he couldn't shake. One night, when Alyssa was in the shower, he tried unlocking her phone. She was meticulous, changed her passcode weekly. That night, he guessed wrong 5 times before it locked. When she came out, towel-wrapped and humming, he smiled as if nothing happened. She smiled back. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. But the problem was no longer just suspicion. It was erosion. The slow, painful crumble of trust. And it was happening silently. Daniel couldn't tell his friends. Couldn't go to the police, he had no hard proof. No confessions. No crime. Just feelings. Just those damn cracks. And yet, beneath all of Alyssa's grace and poise, he began to feel it. The hidden heat of a secret life just barely restrained. A coldness that slithered in, uninvited, every time she touched him with just a bit too much calculation. She was careful. He had to be smarter. But every stone he turned revealed nothing. As if someone had already been there, wiped the dust, erased the fingerprints, sterilized the past. Alyssa didn't just lie well, she lied like it was second nature. Like truth had never been part of her vocabulary. Like her entire existence was designed. And Daniel? He was falling deeper into the web. Still, something inside him whispered, keep looking, keep digging. Because sometimes when the truth hides long enough, it stops being just a secret. It becomes a threat. And the closer Daniel got, the more dangerous the truth would become. But he didn't know that. Not yet. That would come soon. Too soon. They say love blinds you, but nobody warns you what happens when the blindfold is ripped off and all you're left with is the wreckage of what you thought was real. Daniel stood on the edge of a dream. His wedding day was just a week away, the final fittings done, the vows written. Alyssa, had never looked more radiant, more locked in, more perfect. But the truth? It was bubbling beneath the surface like a gas leak, silent but fatal. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he was about to marry didn't exist. Not really. It was Fred, his best friend, his brother in all but blood, who lit the first match. It started with the smallest of things. Alyssa mentioned a cousin's engagement party in Napa. But when Fred looked into the venue, it was closed for renovations. A harmless lie maybe. But something twisted in his gut. So he made a call. The private investigator, an old army buddy who now specialized in digital footprints and corporate fraud, agreed to do a light sweep. Just enough to settle Fred's paranoia. But what came back wasn't light at all. The man in the photo, the one Daniel found months ago, the one Alyssa claimed was a college friend, wasn't a friend. He wasn't even an ex. He was her husband. Still legally married. Still breathing. And not just that, Alyssa wasn't Alyssa. Her legal name had been changed 3 times over the last 10 years. She'd used fake social security numbers, different addresses, closed accounts, a shadow that constantly shifted form. Warrants? None. But civil lawsuits? Dozens. Fraud. Identity theft. Bank account siphoning. She was a whisper in online scam forums, an alias in cold case files. She knew how to fly under radar, and how to disappear just before the roof collapsed. But what hit hardest was this: she had a plan. And it was insidious. The investigator laid it all out in a report. Alyssa had been targeting wealthy, emotionally vulnerable men for years. She scoped them out in grief forums, charity galas, community fundraisers, anywhere someone was nursing a fresh loss or looking for love. And Daniel? He had lost his father 2 years ago. Crushed by it. Devastated. Alone. That's when she showed up. She played the long game, embedded herself in his life, in his family, his future. But this time she wasn't just looking for a quick cash out or a vanishing act. She was angling for legacy. Her name on the house deed. Her hand on his inheritance. A joint account opened just 2 months before the wedding. Power of attorney slipped into a pile of wedding contracts for signature. Everything aligned like clockwork. If the wedding went through, she'd own half of Daniel's assets. And within a year, she'd disappear. Just like she had with the others. Fred sat across from the PI, eyes burning with fury. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? The investigator leaned in, his voice flat. Because she's good. And nobody's ever made it to the wedding. She always bails before it gets that far. This is different. You're the final play. Fred didn't hesitate. We stop her. We end this. But telling Daniel? That was another story. Fred knew his friend. He knew that if he dropped this information on him the wrong way too fast, Daniel would either implode or do something reckless. So he waited. He collected more. He watched Alyssa closely, her movements, her patterns, her excuses. Meanwhile, Daniel, he felt it too. That gnawing thing in his stomach that wouldn't go away. That twitch of doubt when Alyssa would smile too quickly, change her story too easily. When she forgot details she shouldn't forget. He confronted her once, casually. Hey, didn't you say your uncle was from Vermont? She blinked. Did I? Oh no, he moved to Nevada. That's what I meant. And just like that, she flipped the narrative. And made Daniel feel like the crazy one. You okay, babe? You've been so stressed lately. Maybe we should postpone the wedding? She was good. Too good. Making him question himself. Undermining his instincts. Gaslighting him with surgical precision. Daniel wanted to believe her. He needed to. Because the alternative, that he'd been conned, that the woman he was ready to build a life with was a phantom, was too much to stomach. But Fred was done waiting. 3 days before the wedding, he sat Daniel down. No dramatics. Just the manila envelope. Inside, the photo. The marriage certificate. The court records. The alias trail. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, and every line felt like a betrayal written in fire. He stared out the window for what felt like hours. Then finally, I need proof. I need to hear her say it. Fred nodded. Then we beat her at her own game. They devised a plan. One shot. One chance. If they pulled it off, they'd catch her red-handed, no wiggle room. If they failed, she'd walk away with everything. The wedding would go ahead. Everything as planned. But hidden in the bouquet would be a small recorder. Fred would ask a question. Something subtle. Something to make her slip. And if she did, well, Daniel would be ready. But in the days leading up to the wedding, Alyssa didn't flinch. She played her part flawlessly. The doting fiancée. The loving daughter-in-law. the gracious hostess. And yet, beneath the surface there was something else, something Daniel couldn't name. A presence. A predator's calm. The night before the wedding, Daniel found her on the patio, staring into the dark. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. He hesitated. "Not anymore." She smiled. But something about that smile chilled him to his core. The trap was set. The players were in motion. The truth was close. But so was the danger. Because Alyssa wasn't done yet. And what she did next would leave everyone breathless. They say the devil wears Prada, but today she wore white. Not a hair out of place. Not a single misstep. Alyssa moved like poetry down the garden path, every camera flash catching her just right, every guest smiling as if they were witnessing a royal affair. There was no hint, none, that the bride was anything less than a living dream. A dream Daniel had chased, and was now finally about to catch. But dreams lie. And this one was razor-wired beneath the lace. The morning had started like any other wedding day, champagne flutes clinking, florists buzzing around with last-minute tweaks, mothers adjusting ties and veils. But behind the laughter and toasts, beneath the veneer of celebration, something much darker pulsed. Daniel stood quietly in his groom's suite, staring out the tall window. From there he could see the first of the guests arriving. He recognized old friends from college, co-workers, even a few relatives he hadn't seen in years. All smiling. All oblivious. His heart wasn't racing. Not exactly. It was slow. Heavy. Like it had been drugged. He adjusted his tie for the 5th time, but the mirror didn't lie. There was no hiding the tightness in his jaw or the storm in his eyes. He already knew. Knew everything. Only 10 minutes earlier, Fred had burst into the room, phone in one hand, a tablet in the other. He didn't knock. He didn't smile. He just said, "You need to see this." Daniel took the tablet in silence. Tapped the screen. And what stared back at him wasn't a conspiracy theory or an overprotective friend's suspicions. It was undeniable, soul-cutting truth. Photos. Paper trails. Names that didn't match. Bank accounts opened and drained. A man she'd claimed was just a college friend on vacation with her in Maui, he was her husband. Still was. The real kicker? She wasn't even named Alyssa. Her true name, buried under years of forged IDs and dead ends, had a trail of court filings, vanished businesses, and men left hollow in her wake. She'd run cons in 3 states. Married twice. Sued once. Always gone before the law caught up. And now, she was here. In his life. Wearing white. Waiting. Daniel didn't speak. Didn't rage. He just looked at the screen, handed the tablet back, and said, "Don't stop the ceremony." Fred was stunned. "Are you serious? We can end this right now. Call it off." Daniel shook his head. "No. If she's going to destroy me, I want her to do it face to face." Fred hesitated. He had never seen Daniel like this before, this cold calm, this silence that felt like the eye of a hurricane. But he knew better than to argue. Minutes later the music swelled. The guests rose. The doors opened. And there she was, Alyssa. Or whatever her real name was. If she had any inkling that her entire game had collapsed, she didn't show it. She moved with confidence. No tremor in her hands. No flicker of nerves. Her smile could melt steel. Daniel waited for her at the altar, hands folded neatly, face composed. When she finally stood before him, she reached for his hands. He gave them. 100 eyes watched them. None knew the war raging beneath the surface. The officiant began. Words floated above them. Love, honor, forever. The kinds of words that meant nothing in the hands of liars. Daniel stared into her eyes. Searching. And damn it all, she still looked like the woman he loved. When the officiant turned to him for his vows, Daniel held up a hand. Everything stopped. The music cut out. The air froze. Even the birds seemed to quiet. He turned to the guests, looked at each face. Then at Fred, seated in the front row, the tablet resting like a loaded gun in his lap. He took a breath. I was ready to spend the rest of my life with this woman. I was ready to build a home with her, have children, grow old. He turned back to Alyssa. But the thing about love is it can't survive in lies. Gasp. Whispered confusion rippled down the rows. Daniel didn't flinch. The woman standing in front of me isn't Alyssa. Not really. That's just one of her names. One of her stories. She's been married before. She's still married. And the man she called a friend? That's her husband. Alyssa blinked. Her smile faltered just a little. Daniel pressed forward. She's done this before. Moved from place to place, weaving stories, draining accounts, disappearing before anyone sees behind the curtain. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a printed page and held it up. "This is a marriage certificate from Illinois, dated 3 years ago. With her face, her fingerprints, her lies." Someone in the back stood up. The whispers grew louder. Phones came out. Alyssa took a step back. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice smooth, shaking at the edges. He stepped forward. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just not letting you win." Fred stood now, handing the tablet to security. 2 men in suits emerged from the sidelines, quiet, professional, and ready. Alyssa looked at them, then at Daniel. And for the first time in the entire nightmare, she looked afraid. But it lasted only a second. She straightened her back, fixed her veil, and in a voice calm enough to freeze blood, she said, "None of that is true. You're paranoid. This is your guilt talking. You're afraid of love." Daniel laughed once, hollow and humorless. "If I'm paranoid," he said, "why do you have 5 names tied to open warrants in 3 states?" Silence. She didn't answer. She just smiled. Cold. Controlled. But when the officers reached for her, she didn't run. She leaned in just close enough for Daniel to hear, and whispered something in his ear. What she said, it hit him like a punch to the gut. The color drained from his face. His breath caught. Even Fred saw it from where he stood. Something was wrong. More wrong than before. "What did she say?" Fred asked when Daniel returned to the steps. But Daniel said nothing. Because what Alyssa whispered wasn't in the files. It wasn't in the PI's report. It wasn't in any photo or email. It was a secret, one that changed everything. And just like that, the woman who wasn't Alyssa was escorted away. Still smiling. Because whatever she whispered, whatever final card she played, it wasn't the end. Not even close. The wedding is called off. The news spreads like wildfire. Daniel is humiliated, yet strangely relieved. Alyssa is gone, but so are some of Daniel's assets. Fred and the PI start digging into her past more deeply. Daniel begins to piece together her real motivation. It was supposed to be a honeymoon. Instead, it became a crime scene. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, Daniel stood alone in his once spotless condo, now a mess of overturned drawers, ripped envelopes, and shattered illusions. The tuxedo he'd worn at the altar was crumpled over a chair like a corpse in a suit. The champagne had never been opened. The Mr. and Mrs. mugs sat unused on the kitchen counter, next to a bottle of wine with a tag that read "For your forever." That word, forever, now felt like a cruel joke carved into glass. The media had gotten hold of the story within hours. By sunset on the same day, he was trending. Groom exposes bride as wanted con artist at the altar. Clickbait headlines, late-night punchlines, podcast dissection. His face was everywhere. But nobody was asking how it felt to be on the inside of it. And the worst part? Alyssa, if that was even her real name, was gone. Slipped away like a ghost in satin. She never showed up to the police station. No mugshot. No fingerprint match. Somewhere between the exit aisle and the squad car, she had vanished. The officers had gone through protocol, but she'd left no trace. Like she always did. What she left behind, however, was a far more intricate crime than anyone had anticipated. His savings account, emptied. His passwords, reset. His crypto wallet, gone. Even the offshore investments he had barely touched had been accessed. And no matter how many financial advisors he spoke to, how many cyber experts he hired, they all said the same thing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Fred hadn't left Daniel's side since the wedding. He hadn't slept much either. He and the PI, a sharp-eyed, jaded woman named Marla Griggs, had set up a temporary war room in Daniel's spare bedroom. White boards covered in aliases, red string, bank logos, facial recognition software, all of it under harsh fluorescent lights. Marla had seen scammers before. She tracked liars and cheaters. But Alyssa was something else entirely. She was a ghost who left just enough fingerprints to make you doubt they were hers. Every trail led to 2 more. Every answer sparked 3 questions. One morning, as Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the carpet, Fred walked in holding a manila folder. "You need to see this." Daniel flinched. Those words again. "You need to see this." That phrase was a curse now. Inside the folder were photos, grainy, time-stamped, captured from security feeds. Alyssa, in Paris, New York, Hong Kong. Sometimes with men. Sometimes alone. In one of them, she was pregnant. At least it looked that way. But when Marla tracked down the hospital, there were no records. None of the men in the photos could be contacted. One was listed as missing. One had died in what looked like a car crash. Another had checked himself into a psychiatric clinic and refused to speak. They were all like Daniel. Men with ambition. Soft spots. Bank accounts. She doesn't just vanish, Marla said, arms crossed. She reinvents. Every time. New story. New scars. New name. Daniel kept his eyes on the folder. Why me? That question had haunted him since the moment she whispered in his ear before walking off with the police. Why him? It wasn't his money. He didn't have the kind of wealth that would make her risk exposure. Not on this scale. There were safer marks. Easier ones. And yet she had invested months into him. Learned his routines. Met his friends. Memorized his passwords, his fears, his tells. She'd studied him like a book she meant to rewrite. Maybe it's not just about the money, Fred said, sitting across from him. Maybe it never was. And that's when it clicked. It was the whisper. The last thing she said to him at the altar. She hadn't begged. Hadn't denied. She just said, "You were supposed to be the one who saw me." Saw her. Not as a fraud. Not as a ghost. But as a person. Daniel blinked, staring at the floor. Slowly it began to make sense. Not the logic of it, but the madness. The pattern. She wasn't just chasing cash. She was chasing recognition. A stage. An audience that adored her, until she pulled the curtain down herself. She needs to be found, Daniel muttered. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But because if I don't find her, she's going to keep doing this. Marla raised an eyebrow. You want to chase her? Daniel looked up. His face was hollow but alive. I want to understand her. What started then wasn't just a manhunt. It became a descent. He began reviewing everything. Every email. Every moment. Conversations that once seemed sweet now reeked of subtext. Jokes she made, glances she gave, questions she asked. He started seeing the patterns. Psychological cues. Scripts. Alyssa hadn't just lied. She'd written him. Built him from the ground up like a character in her novel. And he had followed the plot perfectly. But now he was off script. Weeks passed. Then a month. Public interest faded, but Daniel's obsession grew. He found himself in dark corners of the web. Talking to other victims. Men who barely remembered her, whose lives had been shredded. One man in Berlin swore she had a different accent. Another in Austin said she'd faked a terminal illness. Every story was different. But the blueprint? Identical. She didn't just destroy. She curated collapse. And then came the voicemail. Late one night. Unmarked number. Just breathing, soft and rhythmic. Then her voice, low, intimate and wrong. You still don't see me. But I see you. You're close, but not close enough. Click. Daniel sat in the dark for hours that night. Not moving. Not speaking. Because now he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he wanted it to be. There are moments in life where silence feels louder than sirens. Daniel sat in one of those moments now, on the edge of a hotel bed, blinds drawn, the soft hum of a fridge filling the void. A month had passed since the voicemail. 2 since the wedding that never was. Yet time felt warped. He was no longer sure if he was counting days, or just regrets. The television was on mute. The screen showed static headlines about a missing heiress. It wasn't her. Not this time. But it still made his heart jump. She had infected his mind. It was hard to admit that. Even harder to admit what came next. He missed her. And how do you mourn someone who never existed? He'd asked himself that every night. The woman he loved wasn't real. The voice, the laugh, the tears she shed in his arms, all of it was curated. Her affection? Scripted. Her fears? Conveniently timed. Every look, every touch, every sigh, choreographed like a symphony of deception. And yet he missed her. Or maybe, more truthfully, he missed who he got to be when she was around. Because that's the most insidious part of emotional manipulation. It doesn't just twist how you see someone else. It reprograms how you see yourself. And when it all burns down, what you're left with isn't just betrayal. It's identity theft. Not the kind that drains bank accounts. The kind that drains souls. Daniel had spent the last few weeks in therapy, not just the kind with leather couches and notepads, but the informal therapy that comes from confronting your own blind spots. He'd begun documenting everything. Not for revenge. Not even to catch her. But to understand the exact moment he handed his heart to a ghost. One red flag stood out above all. She was always just out of reach. A little too vague. A little too perfect. Her past? Inconsistent. Her college? No photos. Her childhood? A few stories but always slippery. She had a way of answering without answering. Of flipping questions back at him with an intimacy that made you forget you'd never actually received an answer. The way she dodged the camera when friends took pictures. The way she never let him post about her. At the time it felt like mystery. Now it reeked of avoidance. She isolated him too gently. Subtly. Your friends don't really get you, babe. But I do. Your family's too much. You don't need that stress. You're different with me. You can be you. Sounded like love. But it was the beginning of erasure. Heat confused control for care. And now the fog was lifting. Marla, the PI, had kept digging. What she uncovered was even darker than they'd feared. Alyssa wasn't a name, it was one of 7. Each had a passport, a story, a trail. And with each new identity, there was a man left broken. Some financially, some emotionally. One allegedly had taken his own life. But not all of them were victims. One, a man named Julian from Marseille, claimed he had been her partner once. Her lover and her accomplice. They'd scammed together. But she'd burned him too. Set him up during a fake art deal, left him to take the fall. His sentence was light, his trauma permanent. She's not just a con artist, Julian told them via Zoom. She's a mirror. She becomes what you want until she sees what she needs. Then she disappears. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. Because it rang true. Too true. He'd wanted someone who saw him. Who made him feel chosen. Valued. Not just successful on paper, but necessary in someone else's story. And she gave him that. Until she didn't. What gnawed at him most wasn't the money she stole. It was the memory of her sleeping beside him, fingers laced with his, whispering dreams that now felt like poison wrapped in silk. Trust, once shattered, doesn't break clean. It leaves jagged pieces inside you. Every conversation now feels like a test. Every compliment, suspicious. Every connection, conditional. And that's the emotional toll no one talks about. Not in podcasts or documentaries or trending Twitter threads. It's the permanent rewriting of your internal compass. Because if someone you loved never really existed, how do you trust anyone ever again? There's a word for it, gaslighting. It's thrown around a lot, but few people truly understand its depth. It's not just lying. It's making you question reality. And Alyssa, whoever she was a master. She didn't just lie about herself. She made Daniel doubt his own intuition, his memories, his sense of safety. She bent reality until it broke. And once you start doubting your instincts, you're lost. That's where the damage lives, not in the lie but in what it steals from you. Marla closed the case file last week. There's no way to prosecute, she said. She used a dozen fake identities. And the ones that are real? They're protected by legal gray zones, international loopholes. You'll never find her through legal channels. Daniel nodded. He knew that already. But there was one place she hadn't erased herself from. His mind. So he wrote. Not for sympathy. Not for justice. But for every person who's ever laid next to someone they loved, only to realize they were sleeping beside a stranger. He wrote every detail. The subtle red flags. The gut feelings he ignored. The emotional sleights of hand. He shared it with forums, podcasts, private groups for scam survivors. And the replies came in waves. Hundreds. Thousands. From women and men alike. This happened to me too. I thought I was crazy. You've described exactly how it felt. He wasn't alone. And neither were they. That became the final twist in his story, not just that he survived the con, but that he found a way to turn his wound into warning. To speak not just about fraud, but about grief. Because love, when weaponized, is the most dangerous tool of all. And perhaps the most devastating truth was this. Sometimes what breaks us the most is learning the person we loved never truly existed. Daniel looked out the window of his condo, the city lights flickering like memories. He still didn't know her real name. He probably never would. But he knew this. The next time someone made him feel like he was the only one in the room, he'd remember how easy it was to feel seen, right before everything disappeared. You made it to the end. If you felt the heartbreak, the weight of silence where trust used to be. If you felt the rage, the slow burn of betrayal dressed up as love. If you felt that gut-wrenching moment of truth, where everything you thought was real cracked beneath your feet, then take a breath and share it with us in the comments. Someone out there needs to know they're not the only one who's loved a ghost. And if stories like this hit you deep, if they keep you thinking long after the screen goes dark, then support this channel, like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones made up in the dark. Not all masks are worn on Halloween, and not every love story ends with a kiss.